On to Module 3 then. This is Module 3, Topic A, and Global Sporting Mega Events, which is clearly a huge topic, so I better get into it as soon as possible. So we're moving from bodies to global sporting spectacles, and this module really focuses on the economics, politics and cultural dimensions of global sporting mega events and how they are related to global sporting spectacles, because mega events are effectively global spectacles as well. And we begin really at the moment in this Module 3 Topic A looking at the mega events particularly, and largely on the spatial economics of these mega events and how they relate to cities present and futures. And although we don't look exclusively at the Olympic Games is the biggest sporting mega event, and a lot of this topic actually focuses on that, and I think it gives us a lot of insights into other types of mega events, but in many respects the Olympics is the pinnacle. And what this topic does and speaks about in some respects is this: the fact that over the last 50 years cities have changed the structure and function, what they actually do as cities. We've moved from an industrial to post-industrial economic systems. Cities used to produce things, materials, goods, products. Now cities produce consumption, experiences, and we have to think about where the sporting mega event fits into that post-industrial experience consumption-based economy. So that's how we're going to look at mega events, and this is where we're going to look into it, the various aspects, sporting mega event, place wars, Neoliberal Olympics, and then problematizing this notion of the mega event, some of the issues that have arisen in recent times. And also in the summary we'll be looking at the potential future for mega events and sporting mega events in particular. So first we're going to look at what precisely is a mega event, quite obviously. And there is a load of research out there in the university library. There's probably too much stuff on mega events and sporting mega events in particular, but before we do anything else we need to define what they are. And previously, prior to 1987, when the term mega event was first used, they were referred to as hallmark events. And hallmark events were tourist events, major fairs, expositions, cultural and sporting events of an international status. And they provided the opportunity, the host community, with an opportunity to make itself more prominent in the international marketplace. And but it did come with significant, I would say, economic, social and environmental costs. Now, the original hallmark events, you could go back to the 1850 or original mega events, 1850 Great Exhibition in Crystal Palace in London, which is a very famous, massive event. All the industry of the time came together and the whole world focused on this great exhibition, the industry of all nations. And but probably the first major sporting mega event was the 1896 Olympics in Athens, Greece, the first of the modern Olympics in 1896. So we can see there's a history to them. But according to Muller, let's go from hallmark events to what mega events specifically are. And Muller's work is particularly useful here. Mega events are ambulatory, they're moving, but they're recurring events. They're events that recur, but they move around to different places. But they're fixed and predictable in their duration. They last for a particular period of time and you know when they're going to be. They draw significant amounts of visitors and spectators. That's what makes them mega. And increasingly over the 20th century, the broadcast media and the media coverage of them was key in making them mega and bringing them to the attention of global publics, global viewing publics. And they do involve a large capital investment and cost. It costs a lot of money to host one of these massive mega events. And the impact is physical, economic, political and on cultural spheres as well. And I should say that down there. It should say Muller and not Hall, and I'll change that because the Muller is an important reading. So there we have it changed, the Muller. As I said, it's an important article. So let's have a look at a couple of these in a bit more detail. Ambulatory and moving, recurring events. Think about the Olympic host cities where they've been all over the world, you know, from, where is it, Athens in 1896 through to Paris in 2024 for the Summer Games. They do move around, mainly to North American, European countries, but they can also go to Asia, Australasia to some degree. Never been an Olympics in Africa. There's only been one Summer Olympics in Rio de Janeiro in 2016. But they do move around, they're recurring. Future Olympic host cities, Italy, USA, French Alps, Brisbane, Salt Lake City. So you can see they do move every 4 years. For Summer Olympics, every in between times every 4 years. For the Winter Olympics, so we've got the Winter Olympics coming up in 2026, next Summer Olympics in 2028 in Los Angeles, and the Men's World Cup and the Women's World Cup increasingly, they're ambulatory recurring events as well. They have a fixed and durable duration. You know when they're going to be. Look at London 1948, July 29th to August 14th, FIFA World Cup in Russia in 2018, 14th of July to 14th of June to 15th of July. So people know when they're going to be, they can prepare for them, both as hosts and organisers, and people wanting to watch them and or visit them. They do generate a huge number of spectators and visitors, as you can see from Qatar, London 2012, and this is Paris 2024. They're massive global mega events, and as I said before, increasingly they're mega events because they're so intensively mediated, and they create a large media visibility and large media audiences, both on traditional media, television, but also on new social media. They are massive social media events as well. And here we can see, look at the comparative audiences for 2016 to 2024. 2016 Olympics and even the 2020 Olympics. Third, I can't believe this, was the wedding of Harry and Meghan Markle, but I guess that's a mega event as well. Well, not really in the same definition, but as you can see, virtually all, the top 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 5 out of 6 are sporting mega events. 84% of the potential audience followed the Paris 2024 Olympics. 5 billion people followed the Olympic Games in Paris. Quite remarkable. So they're hugely mediated, and they involve a large capital investment and cost. $20 billion for the Qatar World Cup, 15 for Brazil, 14, etc. And we look at the biggest one so far for the Olympics was 60 billion for the 2014 Sochi Winter Olympics. Second, we have Beijing, probably in the mid-50s, and Tokyo, mid-30s. So it's a huge, massive capital investment. And for Qatar, of course, most of that money was building the brand new stadia, or stadiums, depending how you prefer it, that it took to host the games within that nation. And also, it does impact physical, economic, political and cultural spheres. Physical spheres, the look of a city, the look of a region is changed by the fact that new buildings are being built. This was Qatar 2022, and a whole building celebrating that. We have gentrification in Paris 2024. So there's physical and economic changes, political changes, or political impacts. Think about the way the Sochi Olympics and the World Cup in Russia was used by Vladimir Putin as a form of diplomacy and soft power. And also cultural spheres. Increasingly, mega events have to have some type of cultural legacy, and London 2012 was all about inspiring a generation to becoming more active, which is largely why they got the games. So, as Muller, and we get back to that important reading here, says, it's okay talking about mega events as these big, ambulatory, etc. But there are different classes or classifications of mega events. Some are more mega than others. And he comes up with this notion of giga, mega and major events based on 4 criteria. Visitor attractiveness, how appealing they are to visitors. The mediated reach, how globally they are broadcast. The cost to host them, and the degree to which the host site was transformed. So you add all those together and that will determine whether something's a giga, mega or major event. And interestingly, this was done in 2015, so it doesn't take on some of the more recent mega events. This is what he identified. Muller identified the only giga event as being the Olympic Summer Games of 2012 in London, because it had massive visitor attractiveness, huge mediated reach, cost, and it did to some degree transform the London regional area. Whereas something like, well, let me have a look, the Super Bowl in New Orleans, he says, is a major event because it has big mediated reach, and that's about it. So you can see it's quite interesting how we can divide up or rank order these different events, because I think it's important not to think of the mega event as a singular thing. And what I would do for you, and maybe we can do this in discussion, is think about Tokyo, whether it was a giga, mega or major, Beijing, giga, mega or major, the Qatar 2022 World Cup, again, Paris 2024. So we're considering the degree to which these other events fit into Muller's schema of giga, mega or major based on these criteria. And in the future, Milan, that will be the 2026 Winter Olympics, and the 2026 World Cup shared by USA, Canada and Mexico. I mean, I've got definite opinions of which I think of those as giga and which I think is mega, but maybe we can discuss it, as I say. All right, so we do largely focus on the giga event within this topic, and giga events really are major, huge, the biggest form of sporting mega events. So I think we're talking about, and I'm giving the hand away here, Qatar 2022 Olympics, Paris I think was undoubtedly a giga event, as I believe the 2026 World Cup in Canada, Mexico and US will be, and the 2028 LA Olympics. However, just because we're focusing on those giga events doesn't mean we can't think about the implications of what we talk about for smaller events, because I think they're still relevant, just on a smaller scale. Because not every city has the potential to be an Olympic or even a World Cup city, or even, not every nation can really be a World Cup nation. It depends really on the hierarchy of cities. Some cities are more visible, have more money to use to host these events, and they have bigger aspirations. There is a hierarchy of cities that we really have to think about, and the bigger events tend to go to the bigger cities. Now there are anomalies, but generally speaking that's the case. And you know, the Olympics is going to go to a city like Tokyo largely. The Final Four, you know, is it's a major event, but it's not a giga or a mega event. It has more cities within the US. It's not just LA, Chicago or New York. Other cities such as here, Minneapolis, it would appeal to. Similarly with the Super Bowl, it's a big event, but it doesn't need the type of infrastructure, the type of budget that, say, the World Cup or the Olympics does. So just think about the hierarchy of events, the hierarchy of cities, and how oftentimes, and most often, cities tend to align with the size of the events based on the economics, the cultural significance, and the social significance of the city as well. Now, of course, politics does come into that, but that's another story, and that's something for Module 3, Topic B, when we talk about soft power and diplomacy and mega events. So another way of thinking about it, John Horn does this, is he doesn't have giga, mega or major, he just has different tiers of mega events. And I think, again, this is quite interesting. Summer Olympics and Paralympics and FIFA Men's World Cup tend to be tier 1, tier 2 is the men's Euros and the Winter Paralympics, not quite as big as the Summer or the Men's World Cup. And then tier 3 is the Pan Am Games and the Commonwealth Games, which you may not know a lot about. Commonwealth Games tend to be made up of countries that had previously been in the British Empire and now they're in the British, or not in the British Commonwealth, in the Commonwealth of Nations it's called. So it's quite a major event, but it's kind of like a mini Olympics for a certain amount of countries. Similarly with the Pan Am Games, which is Pan American Games, more regional to the American context. So you can see tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. Now here we're talking about those global place wars that I kind of inferred or subtly referred to previously when saying that there is a hierarchy of cities within the world community. Not all cities are what they call alpha cities, London, New York, Tokyo. There are smaller scale cities, and we have to recognise that and think about how cities compete against each other within the new economy. And major cities around the world, such as New York, used to be, and here we'll show it, New York in 1934 was a space of mass manufacturing of material products. Even New York, as much as it had Wall Street, it made things, products, entities. And in post-industrial New York, here's a picture in 2013, it's a space of think work, information-based work, and also, as we'll talk about here, consumption and the production not of things but of services, oftentimes financial services, but also experiences and types of consumer culture. So we've gone from production-based cities to consumption-based cities, and I think that's a big shift. Now how this happened or why it happened and what it means is there's increased inter-urban competition around the world, a struggle between these cities for resources, for capital, through which the city will sustain itself. And in some respects you can think of these mega events that cities are competing each other to host these events, to give them visibility, to make them more attractive places to both do business, to live and visit. So the economics of the city are clearly tied up with the mega events or the cultural events. Could be hosting a museum, hosting a Super Bowl, hosting an Olympics, which draw attention to that city, and they look to host them in order to try and improve the economics of that city. And this we can call a competitive urbanism. Cities compete each other for these resources, for business capital, political capital, human, information and cultural capital. So there's all these different capitals that cities are vying against each other for, through which they can try and, as I said, and I'm repeating myself, they can appeal to potential corporations who want to relocate there, potential businesses who want to build shops and services there, potential visitors, the next one would be potential workers who want to go and move and live there because it's an attractive place to live, because it's got high levels of cultural and informational and human capital, and also for visitors, for tourists. It's a place that's viewed as attractive. So not only is it vibrant in terms of the businesses and the opportunities and the people that want to live and work there, but it's appealing to people from outside who are going to bring themselves and their money to spend as tourists within that city. So cities are constantly competing in this inter-urban competition, this competitive urbanism, and that is where global sporting mega events fits in. And this is what Feinstein and Judd called a new urbanism, where increasingly cities become, as it says there, spaces for consumption, where they can attract all those type of people. And This is because, in a neoliberal sense, and I'm sure you've heard that before, consumption spaces and experiences, and appealing to both people who live there and potential tourists, is the motor or engine of economic growth within the new city. Because the thought is that that type of spending on consumption spaces and experiences will trickle down. The economy will be boosted by that. We don't have factories anymore. What we're producing is consumer spending. And that consumer spending will trickle down to residents in the form of employment, because you have to have jobs to meet the consumer demand, and it will trickle up to the city government in the form of commercial taxes that's paid by the businesses that generate money from tourists and consumers. So consumption within cities becomes that motor of economic growth that trickles up and down to various parts of the economy, making it more vibrant, livable, and able to survive in that competitive urban environment. So as a result, this is where space comes in, and it's the spectacular construction of place that is key to creating these new vibrant and attractive cities around the world. You have to have somewhere that people want to go, so you have to constantly what they call feed the downtown monster, and spend money or give tax breaks so people will come and build attractive, appealing, innovative buildings that can take advantage and enhance the competitive nature of the city. And so what we have, don't know why that didn't, are these type of things within cities. We have the building of retail, sport, festival, leisure, hotel and heritage spaces that all go in to how the post-industrial city is created. So you've got all these things going on that, as I said, are going to attract tourists, they're going to attract consumer spending and make the city more competitive and viable within the global competitive urban marketplace. And we've got a couple of examples here. Another, living spaces. You have to make sure that you've got not only all these type of spaces that are spectacular and appealing, but the places where you want to live within are equally. The residential developments appeal to young, upwardly mobile people who potentially want to move to the city. This is the living space in Istanbul, Turkey, and public spaces, recreation sites, Grant Park in Chicago, spending money to make the city more beautiful, more appealing to both people who want to live there and people who want to visit. All these things are key in the spectacular reinvention of contemporary cities. And it's for this reason that Haider refers to this process of one of global place wars. Different places around the world are competing against each other. Or, as Natalie Cox says, these spectacular cities that are emerging are part of a process of spectacular urbanism, which is a geopolitical tactic. It's a way that cities are competing, fighting for preeminence against other cities around the world. And let's have a look at a couple of examples. Well, the most classic one perhaps is the Bilbao effect in northern Spain, where the Guggenheim Museum was built a number of decades ago, and it was designed by the star architect Frank Gehry, and it's the classic example how a spectacular building, a single building, can benefit the local economy hugely through increased tourism. People previously weren't going to Bilbao in great numbers. They built, here's a geopolitical tactic, spectacularize downtown Bilbao, build the Guggenheim Museum, and people will go there, and they have done in huge numbers. So it just shows how spatial reformation, building new spectacular buildings, new pieces of architecture, can have a massive economic effect by bringing new dollars into the city. In an even similarly, I guess, Saudi Arabia is trying to do a kind of massive Bilbao effect, if you like, it has a Vision 2030. They're trying to diversify the economy. and increase the amount of tourist spend, or increase the tourism from 3% of GDP to 10% by 2030. So how do you appeal to global tourists? You have to spectacularize the country, build new, spectacular, high-tech, interesting, engaging forms of architecture like this King Abdulaziz Centre for World Culture, because they want to get away from oil dependence. Oil's going to run out, or fossil fuels are going to become less and less popular. So Saudi Arabia as an economy has to geopolitically think, how are we going to compete in the future? Let's turn to tourism. So it's done this way. It's, as I said, the massive Bilbao effect. And even bigger is this mega city called Neom that they're building. That they want it to be, I think, it's 200 meters wide, and ultimately they want it to be 110 miles long. At the moment, by 2030, it's going to be 1.5 miles long. But it's part of a multifaceted regional development of the most incredible, spectacular architecture, all designed to try and get more tourists and to Saudi Arabia, and to appeal to people who want to live and work in Saudi Arabia as well. So it's a great example of this competitive urbanism, as is Abu Dhabi. All the new buildings that have gone up in Abu Dhabi over the last 2 to 3 decades, including in a sporting sense, this massive Ferrari World Abu Dhabi, a Ferrari car branded theme park designed to attract global visitors, or visitors from around the world. So you can see, again, it's the Bilbao effect, and quite interesting. And really, this is where the creation of these spectacular urban spaces is all about this: the attraction or retention of major corporations within the city or region, the attraction or retention of an educated workforce within that place, making it appealing for businesses and workers to be there, the attraction of internal and external tourists to the redeveloped cityscape. Come and visit us. You might be an internal tourist, or you might be someone from outside, but come here and spend your money. And the attraction of further investment and development funds into the city. Look, this is a vibrant place to be. Come and build your housing development here, and pump more money into the local economy. So it's all part of this very competitive urban development, or global urban development. And the argument is that global place wars are often sport place or city wars. They're often based around sporting events or phenomenon, trying to get the Ferrari World theme park in Abu Dhabi rather than someone else. Sport does attract people, and sporting mega events does as well, and the infrastructure that's built around them, the buildings, the architecture, etc., can be part of that competitive place-based urbanism. So specifically, where do sporting mega events or giga events, what we're going to look at, fit into this process? And I would argue that what we're looking at here is the Neoliberal Olympics, and how the Olympics, and specifically the Summer Olympics as a huge event, does tie very nicely in with this process of global place wars and competitive urbanism. And as it says here, sporting mega events are part of the struggle for these resources, the struggle to make your city more attractive and appealing in various ways. And the Neoliberal Olympics can be considered neoliberal in a number of ways. Number one, I think because public monies, huge amounts, billions of dollars of public monies, are used as part of what is speculative construction of events and places that are needed to host the games. And the anticipation is we're going to pump billions and billions of dollars into, I don't know, London 2012 or Rio 2016, billions of public funding that's going to go in there, and it's going to generate huge amounts of money in terms of making the city more viable, more competitive, more economically productive in terms of producing greater number of investment and tourist dollars, that's going to trickle down to the benefit of the general public in both the short and the long term. And here it goes. Trickle down neoliberal economics. It's public and to some degree private funding, and increasingly, as we'll see with Los Angeles in 2028, there's more private funding coming into this, go together to create the Olympic spectacle with the hope that this trickles down. Here's the trickle down effect. This is the money that goes into hosting the Olympics, to urban redevelopment, job creation, consumption stimulus, tourist stimulus and sports stimulus. So there's economic, cultural, social, and again I repeat, economic implications that this hosting of the event and the investment of public money in the event has. That's the hope. That's the trickle-down neoliberal effect of the Olympics and other mega events, such as the World Cup. And according to Digby Jones, quoted here in Boykoff, sport is big business, and the Olympic Games will be a win-win for the economy and sporting competition. So old Digby saying that sport's going to benefit the economy on multiple levels, but it also stimulates sporting involvement as well. The Games will lift our international profile. It's talking about London 2012, attract inward investment and boost profits and jobs for everyone. So it sounds great, perfect. And it is. I mean, sure, there are many benefits to it, but certainly Sir Digby there is a big advocate. And according to Goldman Sachs, these economics of the Olympics can be thought of in two ways. Short-term benefits, specifically what people spend, the expenditure in related to goods and services that, the building of new facilities, the tourists spend during the Games and prior to the Games, possibly a little bit after the Games. So there's a lot of Olympic related spending that brings short-term benefits, but the long-term benefits as well. Promotion of the city, attracting tourists in the long term, and investors and upgrades and facilities to the city infrastructure. So you get a short-term economic boost, but perhaps a long-term economic and social benefits from the increased infrastructure and the long-term boost in spending that becoming an Olympic city in terms of attracting more tourists brings to you. So you can see why, as a politician, I'd want, if I was the mayor of, somewhere, for short and long-term benefits, I can see why I'd want the Olympics and perhaps why I would want to spend so much money on hosting them. And here we can see these are the predicted by the IOC. So, economic benefits of both the Olympic and Paralympic Games. 12 billion in Paris, 18 in Los Angeles, 13 in Brisbane. This is in billion. And for the Winter Olympics, which again is smaller, more of a mega event rather than the giga event that these are, it's $3.2 billion. Still a lot of money, a lot of economic boost to the local area. This is what it's thought. However, increasingly, and certainly since 1992, the Olympic Games, the IOC, the organising body of the Olympic Games, is looking to move beyond a short-term view. They want bigger, long-term legacies for their events to make sure that they are contributing positively to the host city, the host region, for a longer period of time. And they've identified 5 different forms of legacy: economic, urban, sporting, environmental and social, that they try and demand that any bidding city make sure this is part of their bidding materials that they can identify. And I'll give you some examples of each of these. The economic legacy, well, it's kind of obvious, we've talked about it before quite a lot. Increases in general spending, gross domestic product, job creation, growth in tourism sector, pathway to hosting other major events, which brings more money in, and significant impact on spending more generally. So the neoliberal effect, if you were. And for this reason, urban Imagineers and city marketers, kind of urban imagineers, people who imagine the future and viability of cities, city planners effectively. They've learned to refashion the urban landscape for visual consumption, making it look appealing as much as feel appealing through spectacular images, architectural images and urban iconography, in the hope of producing real economic value. So in many ways what you're trying to do is create a new urban space that feels and looks appealing, and the Olympics does play into that. Now, you create spectacular Olympic space in two ways: by involving built heritage and innovative design. And remember, given the spectacular nature, the hugely broadcast nature of the Olympic Games, these spaces are beamed around the world for people sitting in, their front room watching it, 4,000 miles away, thinking, God, I really fancy going to Barcelona. Oh, that looks like a real place to visit, simply because they've been beamed from their living room into that place by the Olympic Games. So you can see why, almost as a tourist promotion and marketing, the Olympics is quite an effective tool. And in terms of built heritage, think about some of these. It's quite remarkable. This is one of my favourite pictures, Sagrada Familia in Barcelona, and this is the diving platform. So the pictures were purposefully taken so divers would take off from the high board, 30-metre board diving, looking out across the city, and you get this wonderful cityscape that really brought Barcelona to the attention of a global viewing public. Similarly with Sydney 2000, Sydney Harbour Bridge, Beijing and the Great Wall of China, the Acropolis in Athens, London, and that's Horse Guards Parade. I don't know why anyone would go there, but anyway, that's another thing. And more recently, we had Versailles, where they had some equestrian events. You had the Seine and the famous bridges, where they had the triathlon, and also the finish of the road races in the Paris 2024 going under the Eiffel Tower. So you'd have the winner saluting his victory with the backdrop of that. All of these using the built heritage to promote the city space. But not only that, we also have innovative design. And you think about the Olympics, and oftentimes you think about incredible architecture that almost makes you want to visit. In fact, when I was in Sydney, I went to that stadium because I thought it was amazing. Now it doesn't look that amazing when you compare it with what happened in Beijing with the Bird's Nest and the Water Cube and the Media Centre. Incredible things. And also London 2012, that's the Velodrome, the Rio, I think that's the Aquatic Centre, and this is the Climbing Centre in Paris. So innovative design is another way of spectacularising the Olympic city and Olympic space. And as Waite says here, imaging a city through the organisation of spectacular urban space, which is what we're looking at. It's not only building it, it's presenting it to the global viewing public or the watching public. For example, hosting the Olympic Games is an important mechanism for, quote, attracting capital and people in a period of intense inter-urban competition and urban entrepreneurialism. As ever, I think Waite here captures exactly what we're really talking about. And if there was a Bilbao effect for cities more generally, there's definitely a Barcelona effect. The hosting of the 1992 Summer Olympics in Barcelona had a massive effect on popularising Barcelona as a tourist destination. It seems crazy now because it's one of the most over-touristed places in the world, and locals in Barcelona are sick of it. But part of it can be attributed to the effect of hosting the Olympics and drawing the attention of the world to Barcelona as a great place to visit. So this video will talk to you about the Barcelona effect. And here's some tangible ways you can think about it. As I said, 1992 was key. In 1990, 1.7 million visitors a year. 1993, a year after, 2.3. So the long-term effect by 2019, 12 million visitors a year. 6 times virtually the amount of visitors pre-Olympics. So I think you can say that there was a significant effect. almost to the detriment of the city, some would say, from hosting of those fantastic games. And this is another way that the IOC talks about it: the tourist benefits in spend, revenue, impact, visitors, branding and marketing of the city, and tourists more generally. You can look at each of those and see, and it's quite a useful way of thinking. And remember, this is the IOC, and their figures are legitimate, I'm sure, but they're looking to promote the positive economic benefits, certainly. Now, let's turn to urban legacies. And so there's economic legacies, but in terms of urban legacies, it's how has hosting a mega event or a giga event like this is the London 2012, significantly impacted or transformed the local environment, the built environment, the infrastructure, the housing, etc., the transport. And certainly bids for major events, if they're successful, have to demonstrate what this urban legacy is. And we can see in London 2012 there was pretty much a rundown parts of London, Stratford, turned into a high-end, you can't really tell this, but it's a very high-end shopping centre that you had to walk through to actually get to the games. And this Westfield shopping centre became a catalyst for the redevelopment and regeneration of what was previously a socially and economically deprived part of London. So it was a huge urban legacy in terms of improving people's experience. And it went from a fridge mountain to an Olympic stadium. So you can see then and now quite a significant difference. Similarly with, and they're all massive, every mega event you could think of in which there's a competitive hosting practice and you have to go through a bidding process has to demonstrate this legacy, or it's project a legacy that it's going to have. And certainly the Rio Olympic Park in 2016 was going to revitalise many parts of Rio de Janeiro, and a large part of this was going to include future affordable housing, mixed housing for mixed populations of economically wealthy and less wealthy. So a large percentage of it would be affordable. And as it says here, the games will help accelerate the city's broader long-term aspirations. This is from the bid document, enhancing its social and physical fabric. So it's not just about money, it's about infrastructure and the long-term experience of living in the city that's going to be improved by hosting the games, as I said. And you could look along here, all different types of things: improving the airport, improving the metro, the mass transit, the bus routes, the roads, the sewers, etc., And according to the organisers, Rio will become a greater global city and an even better place to live, do business and visit. So you can see how Rio is trying to assert itself within that global competitive urbanism that we talked about previously by getting and hosting successfully and having a short and long-term legacy of the 2016 Olympics. So that's that. Third, sporting legacies. And as I said to you before, London was the classic example of this. Increasingly, the IOC want to see the fact that not only is the legacy economic and infrastructural, but it's also social and cultural. And so Inspire a Generation was the tagline for the London 2020 Games, and it was said that it was going to be the legacy games, and a higher percentage of the UK population were going to, not only young people, but focused on the youth, were going to become involved in physical activity, and it was going to, quote, inspire a generation to become more active, not just active at the elite level, but active more generally. Now, there's mixed results as to whether this did it or not, but it was a great advertising campaign, and I still get emails from them in this regard. And you can see this notion of the legacy games here talked about in some of the bid materials from London 2012, and this is the very famous bid video that they put out, foregrounding inspirational power of sport, the inspirational power of sport, not only for people in the UK, but for children around the world. It's going to inspire a global generation. And it's thought that this legacy effect, or the talking of which, was an important reason why they got the games. I mean, we don't know that. The IOC voting process is clandestine, to say the least, but this is clearly what London 2012 organisers keyed on. Number 4, environmental legacies. Increasingly, Olympic Games have to be sensitive to environmental issues. They have to create healthy, sustainable public spaces and facilities that are going to include renewable forms of energy, recycled material, and more environmentally friendly mass transit systems. It's kind of obvious in the type of world we live in now. We have to be green in terms of our architecture, sustainable and environmentally friendly, working towards a net zero world that we're hopefully going to live in one day. But this has gone back quite a way in the IOC. You can go back to Sydney 2000, which is dubbed by their bid materials as the Green Olympics. And certainly, I think that this is something that we could see and has become a kind of an absolute, and maybe it will become increasingly so. If we looked at Qatar 2022 and the possible hosting of the FIFA Men's World Cup in Saudi Arabia in 2034, it'd be interesting to see how the sustainability and the environmental legacy was talked about in there as well. Anyway, you can see that in that video clip from Sydney in 2000. Moving on, this is a bit more, the remediation of certain places as well, and reclamation of previously polluted or underserved land, or underused land I should say, such as the Homebush Bay, which is where the 2000 Sydney Olympic Stadium was built, I believe. So moving on, and I should say dioxin pollution. So similar to the Fridge Mountain, that part of Stratford in London was hugely polluted and it was unusable, but the Olympics went in, cleaned it up and made it a usable, viable, healthy space. And then finally, social legacies. Well, not finally, I should say. And these are social and political legacies, I think. And I don't know if you don't want to overblow it, but the Olympic Games do bring with them a sense of unity, potentially, for the inhabitants of the host city or nation, so they can celebrate the fact that they're the centre of the world, the focus of the world, and it can promote national pride and a sense of communitas or belonging around the mega event, be it hosting the World Cup or certainly in London 2012. The nation did to some degree, and it is a divided nation in many ways, but it came together around, for that 2-week period, around this massive event that brought the world's attention to London and united, to some degree, the 4 nations of the United Kingdom. Now, that's the kind of a social legacy, and this is what the 2016 Rio bid film tried to emphasise, the fact that the Games would bring the Brazilian nation together, the multicultural Brazilian nation together. But they're also, and here we see, it was used politically by Lula, the president at the time, when they bid for the Olympics, to demonstrate how he, by getting the Olympics, could bring, by advancing Brazil's status within the world economy, he could bring the Olympics together and bring the nation together. So in doing so, in creating that social legacy, really enhancing his political popularity, status, and his own political legacy. And so this is part of Lula's political populism, by making him popular to the general public, by securing the 2014 World Cup and the 2016 Olympic Games for Brazil and Rio de Janeiro, respectively. So you can see there is potentially social and political legacies that do come out of hosting these events. Okay, so far we've painted a rather positive picture of the process, practice and experience legacy of hosting, an impact of hosting these mega events. But as with everything, there's two sides to the coin, and there is undoubtedly some issues, some problems with them, and that's what we're going to look at in the next couple of themes. Because on one sense there's a positive aura. Everyone loves, you love hosting an event, you love having an event there. It brings a lot of positive energy, but various academics, various journalists, various economists around the world over recent decades have really begun to scrutinize these major events, and they've been subject to considerable criticism. And the criticism in this first theme is going to be economic-based criticism. And this is starting with this. The Olympic Games, FIFA World Cup, many of these major events, they rely on a combination of public and private funding. So it's really public and private coming together to some degree. But for some of them, and it depends on the country, of course, in Sochi 2014 and the Russian World Cup in 2018, or even the Saudi Arabia the Qatar World Cup in 2022, these are largely publicly funded entities. But in more Western democracies, they tend to be a balance between public and private money, veering until recently towards more public funding, which is the source of criticism for many people. And we can look back at London 2012, the total budget estimated, and it's impossible to get these estimations because you hear different things from different, even official sources. But the central government gave 6 million. The National Lottery, which is a form of public funding, gave 2 million. The Greater London Authority, nearly £1 billion, and £250 million from the London Development Agency, all of which are direct or indirect public funds. So $10 billion, or $9.325 billion of public funding were directed into London 2012. And these PPPs, because there were other forms of funding as well that came in, but the large majority of it was that public funding, are at the heart of many of these developments, these mega event projects, because the private sector, they're driven largely by public money, because it says here the private sector doesn't want to expose itself to potentially huge losses. So through tax breaks or building an infrastructure investment, public funds help to build or finance or certainly incentivize private corporations to get involved, but the major risk isn't on these private corporations. The major risk for the $10 billion to host the games is with public money. So in many respects what you're doing is you're gambling with public money in the hope that private companies are going to turn the hosting or the development and the building of it into a huge profit. And sometimes that happens. And so for many Olympic Games, they become a commercial opportunity for private developers and contractors. And I think this kind of quite nicely shows it. It's a building exercise, a mass event building exercise for the building industry. And the people that do benefit in terms of getting large-scale contracts out of the budget for the games are often people involved in the built environment, stadia and housing, infrastructure, security and consultants. So these are private developers and contractors who generate considerable amounts of income from the hosting of the games. They don't have the risk. They're being subcontracted by the organisers using public funds to pay them to build these various entities, a lot of which they generate profits from, partial profits from at least, but they're certainly generating profits from the building process, the consultant process, security, infrastructure, stadia and housing. So you can see it's the Olympic Games, the World Cup can be a publicly funded spectacle where the risk is with the public money, but the potential reward is largely with private firms. I think that's the key. And where does the Olympic budget go? And this is nearly 6 million. The core costs, infrastructure and regeneration, security 600 million. Core Olympic costs would be building of Olympic Village, stadia, 3 billion, 1.67 for infrastructure. So you can say it's billions of dollars that are going to these people here. And this is 2012. This would be even more significant in terms of funding in later years as well. And it says 6.5 billion of Olympic money in London 2012 to private developers, contractors for the construction of facilities and infrastructure. £6.5 billion, $10.3 billion in 2012 money. That's a lot of cash. And Boycott, as ever, puts it nicely. Olympic private-public, public-private partnerships, PPPs, are lopsided because, quote, the public pays and the private profits. The public pays, public interests pay, public monies pay, but private interests, commercial, for-profit interests, literally profit from the games. The public takes the risks and private groups scoop up the rewards. That's the view. And, well, in the neoliberal sense, you're saying, well, the private sector gets the rewards and it trickles down to everyone else. That's the argument. So public investment is justified because of those anticipated benefits deriving from the trickle-down neoliberal effect. But, as you can imagine, oftentimes these economic benefits, the trickle-down effect in terms of employment, expenditure, etc., are not realised to the levels anticipated prior to the event. Basically, they don't make as much money for the general public, for the common good, as was expected or was anticipated or was promoted prior to the event. And part of this is because the costs of the event are hugely downplayed, and so they don't make as much profit, largely because the anticipated budget for virtually every Olympics, I think I've got a diagram showing you this soon, the overrun is massive based on what the original budget was and what the eventual budget was, as it says here. And again, a lot of these figures, they're very, it's very difficult to pinpoint them down. These give you a general trend. 2000 estimate of the 2016 games was 28.7 billion reais, or $11.9 billion, and by 2014 they were expecting that to increase by more than 50%. So is it any wonder that the more public money has been spent out and less profit in the end comes from them, because literally they're in debt to the actual money, the expenditure that has to go out to actually pay for the games, and so they have to pay for that on a longer and longer period. And so the money that is generated in the local economy, etc., by taxes tends to go not to new projects but to paying off that debt for a longer and longer period. The 1976 Summer Olympics in Montreal, they only paid off the debt for that, I believe, in the early to mid noughties, 2006 or 7 or something like that. So it was a 30-year expenditure in which that money couldn't be paid or used for other infrastructure projects. Anyway, so there's huge costs behind the Olympics, and here's the overrun in percentages. Rio de Janeiro, 352% overrun. Here's some examples. Sochi, 289%. Rio, 352. Tokyo, 128. Beijing, 149. And Paris, even Paris was thought to be a more sustainable, environmentally better balanced games. Its overrun was 115%, still significant. And is it any wonder that profits aren't made, or they're exaggerated and not realised? And I think this, Muller again Gogishvili and Wolf, they do a really good job. And this is another important article, it's one of your readings, that you can look at to see the difference between, as it says here, the costs and the expenditure for both the summer, the winter Olympic Games and the World Cup. And the costs are massive, and the revenues that they generate are nowhere near as big as the costs. And we can look at those in slightly bigger terms. Again, London 2012, massive costs, but also the biggest revenues, but didn't get anywhere near covering the costs. And here it shows ticketing, sponsorship and broadcast are the revenues, and the cost are organisation and venues. Winter Olympics, Sochi, Putin's Sochi Olympics, massive cost, mediocre revenues. And massive costs for Japan and South Korea for the World Cup, not that great revenues. Russia, massive costs, made significant revenues. So that's kind of interesting. Almost not quite a balance. What is it? Just over 5 billion. Just over. Well, maybe the Russian Olympics, Putin's Russia World Cup actually made money. I'm not sure. I'll have to see about that. So global sports spectacles do create capital or profit, but much of this is generated by the developers and contractors and transnational corporate sponsors. They're the people that it is argued make the real money from these mega events. They don't trickle back into the local, regional or national economy. Rather, and it says here, they flow back into international headquarters of the transnational developer or corporation. So it's the contractors and the sponsors who are generating the money, and that money, as it says here, doesn't trickle back into the local, national or regional economy. It goes to the global economy, wherever these contractors or corporate sponsors are in fact headquartered. And this is called the drain effect. It's leakage. The money doesn't stick in the local economy. Imagine the Olympic Games as a giant drain. Money flows from the community into the stadium, where it whirls around for a bit, funnels down some murky pipes, exiting far, far away. So again, contractors, sponsors, the money comes in, and it's siphoned, it's leaked, it's drained far away from that local economy. So I think that's an interesting way, the drain effect of thinking about where money goes within these mega events, and it doesn't stick or stay within that local economy. Turning from the economic issues to more social issues, and this is problematizing sporting mega events in terms of gentrification, displacement and securitization. And these are really the social impacts, or the negative social impacts, that hosting the Olympics in reality can have on individual cities and citizens. And the question is, the assumption is that hosting the Olympics improves the everyday lives of the host city's population or the region's population. And I think to some degree we've demonstrated that it can do, but it doesn't necessarily. And in some senses and in some examples, hosting the Games has had a negative impact on people's experience of the city. Firstly, around this notion of gentrification. Now, the redevelopment of city spaces, oftentimes, and regeneration of those spaces is focused oftentimes on what were previously industrial or poor neighbourhoods, and they're trying to redevelop them, to gentrify them in order to make them more economically sustainable, vibrant and affluent communities. Now, this is gentrification in many ways, because what this does is the development and regeneration of the communities increases profit prices, and the previously poor populations who lived there are moved out either forcibly or economically they can't afford to live there anymore because rents have gone up and the sales, the price of houses is so become exorbitant because they've regenerated. So you've effectively gentrified, turned it into a more upper scale neighbourhood and displaced the original population. Now, for some, if you live there in these wonderful new gleaming post-Olympic communities, that's great, but it's not particularly good for the displaced population. This is what many people argue. And what you have to wonder about is with these, as Kumar says here, is all of this is, as they put it, a dispossession of the poor and a further marginalisation of the poor. And it really makes you consider, in terms of the city's working class, for whom and for what purpose the city exists. So the city exists, according to the displaced populations and people who support them, for the accumulation of capital, and these poorer people are just in the way, so we need to get rid of them so we can regenerate an area, make more money from it, and we cast them aside, we displace them, and they're literally marginalised both symbolically and culturally and economically. So we reconfigure the city for more affluent spaces and populations to the detriment of the dispossessed. This is the argument. So this is what many people have said, that Olympic beautification, development and gentrification is an effective form of urban cleansing. Cleansing urban neighbourhoods that you want to redevelop as part of the Olympic hosting, cleansing them of the poor and impoverished populations who previously lived there. And Harvey calls this an accumulation by dispossessing. You're dispossessing, often forcibly, of people of the spaces where they lived, and you're dispossessing them of the neighbourhoods that they may have raised there and their kind of families and in generations gone past. And this has been evidence in quite a few Olympics in the 21st century. Forceful evictions and demolitions of lower cost housing, privatisation of what was previously public or affordable housing, commercial developers coming in to make money, restricted rights or access to public space. It was previously public space, it becomes restricted access, perhaps as part of a housing development where only people that live in that development, that private upscale, can access, where it was previously public space. And it's the overall the gentrification and creative, economically exclusive spaces through which the poor are dispossessed to be replaced by the more affluent. Now there are a number of examples of this. In Beijing in 2008, as this video clip will show you, is demolishing the Hutong neighbourhoods. As it says here, it's historic neighbourhoods, and 1.5 million people were displaced in the process through forced evictions to build the modern Olympic city. Quite remarkable. In the 2010 World Cup in South Africa, there was a temporary relocation area. This is where people who were forcibly evicted from areas that were being developed, and many lived there for years and years, into these, I don't even know how to describe them. They're almost like metal sheds, which became called Tin Can Town, or this name was Blickersdorp. And the cleansing of removal of these populations from Cape Town, Tin Can Town became a dumping place, taking people from the streets because they don't want them in the city for the World Cup. Now they're living in a concentration camp. So clearly this isn't benefiting the lives of those people living there. Tin Can Town, again, quite chilling really, that a mega event that's supposed to bring improved experiences perhaps doesn't for all. And there was gentrification in London, certainly, in Stratford, which was a less affluent neighbourhood. And part of the reason why the Olympics was cited there was to try and improve and rebalance the neighbourhood, bring more money into to bring everybody up. But what tended to happen was house prices went up, and it didn't include, and people who'd previously lived there, if you look at 1999, a house was worth 130,000. By 2012, in the Olympic Games, it was worth 545,000. So people were pushed out in terms of house pricing and related rents. So gentrification certainly happened in Stratford around the Olympic development. and the Carpenter estate there being the classic example of it. And as with many promises, the London Olympic Village, which is where athletes lived, prior to the Games was promised to be 49% of affordable housing within this development. This was reduced to 31% after the Games. And so, developers want to make more money, so they want to reduce the amount of affordable housing they have, because they make less money by selling it as affordable housing as opposed to full market rates. But in doing so, what you're doing is forcing and displacing economically poorer populations from the spaces where they previously lived. And for this reason, this article says that the London Olympics residents were betrayed over the housing promise. Of the 9,000 housing units built on the Olympic site, 50% were projected to be affordable for local people. As of 2022, only 200 of 9,000 were affordable. I don't know what that is a percentage, but that seems to me being about 1% rather than 50%. So you can see why the argument would be that they're betrayed, and there's been this effective displacement of poorer people from the neighbourhood where they lived. Again, Rio 2014 World Cup and 2016 Olympics are great examples of this, and perhaps more stark in Rio because this is talked about in Zirin's book, Brazil's Dance with the Devil, because much of Rio is built around working class favelas, shanty towns, usually located within the outskirts of the city. And as you can see here, this is the favelas, the one in red here, and specifically the favelas around the Olympic Village and the Maracana Stadium were ones that came into stark relief, or became the focus of the development, because they wanted to socially cleanse the favelas in many ways, develop and demolish significant parts of them that were close to the Olympic zones or the main arteries of transport which connect them, to try and beautify the city by getting rid of what they were viewed as being undesirable spaces and to some degree populations. So you can imagine this is quite a significant human rights issue, that you're being forcefully evicted from your favela. And civil liberties and human rights demonstrators certainly critique this, as it says here in the demonstration in Villa Autodromo: "Don't throw us out, better city planning is the solution." So they become the victims of Olympic development rather than having the city help them and improve their neighbourhoods. They kind of almost eviscerated them instead. And here we have a video clip talking about this process and what it meant for the people who actually lived in these favela. And on reflection, what we see is forced evictions and privatised development, especially in Villa Autodromo, although a considerable response to it, and privatised development on those lands. 80,000 people evicted from low-income neighbourhoods, and following the Games, 75% of the Olympic site was purchased by private developers to generate for-profit projects. So it's the commercialisation of those neighbourhoods, the gentrification of them post-Olympics. Doesn't seem to be the forced displacement of the people that previously lived there and their kind of marginalisation and the creation of those previously working class favelas into more upscale, or attempted to become more upscale housing developments such as this. So, positive benefit for local inhabitants, not if you lived in these particular favelas, certainly. And in order to enact these various policies, these evictions, etc., and demolitions, there's a notion of securitization, where security forces of various types not only sweep and socially cleanse neighbourhoods to get rid of criminals, drug users, low kind of pickpocketers, etc., to make the spaces more amenable to local and international tourists. They also, in the Rio case, used the military to enforce the evictions and the mass demolitions. So there's a place that you've got gentrification, displacement and securitization, the increased impact of security forces on the lives of people living in these transforming communities. And so the attempt to pacify these favela by, because there's, within many of these favelas, there's a lot of crime that needed to be addressed, so the authorities felt, and the way to address it was to put armed security forces into them. That created a number of quite violent confrontations that led to significant amounts of deaths on both sides, I would add. So it wasn't a particularly happy process in any way, shape or form. And here's a video talking about this militarized pacification. So you're pacifying the crime rates, the populations, but also the antagonism towards the Olympics as well. And I think overall, when we think about Rio 2016 and the favela, as it says here, the driver for this process was first and foremost the effort to recover and reoccupy important urban areas to pacify them and reassure domestic capital and attract foreign investment. And it says here, the safety and needs of the favela populations has always been secondary to these economic considerations. Always been secondary. That's the argument. So again, are the Olympics bringing positive benefits to that population, to those favelas? It's difficult to argue, really. To many parts of Rio, perhaps, but not to the working class neighbourhoods identified. And maybe Paris to some degree, and I think the jury is still out on Paris 2024. Really, it's only just happened. But it's interesting to look at. A number of the neighbourhood, or the main neighbourhood where the Olympic Village and Stadium was, around this Saint-Denis, which is on this northeast side of Paris, which is colloquially known as the 9-3 or 9-3. It's an economically disadvantaged minority suburb of banlieue. So it's a very diverse neighbourhood, lots of relative impoverishment, lots of migrant workers, lots of people probably unemployed or underemployed who are struggling in many ways. And so they chose to locate because it was, again, a cheaper area in terms of for land, and it hadn't been developed, and poorer people lived there, and they were perhaps easier to engage and to deal with in terms of the Olympic development project. And the argument is that Saint-Denis is going to be, with a 1.5 billion investment, is going to develop the Olympic Village, which is this, into residential units, some of which will be low income. So the hope is that it's going to be a game changer for Saint-Denis. It's going to improve the economic basis of the neighbourhood, but not gentrify it, perhaps. Just bring up the economic viability of the area and include affordable housing so the local population will still live there and won't be displaced. That was the theory. We're still wondering to see whether it happened or not. And it has perhaps all the best intentions, that it's, rather than being isolated from the rest of Paris, Saint-Denis has been included into it. But the argument from some is it's been included as a gentrifying area rather than really a diverse, mixed, and retaining the identity of the area as it was previously. But it's certainly, as it says along here, there's been a lot of new infrastructure put in there to try and uplift the area. And you'll see from this video clip whether or not the games have been a game changer, or we're projecting forward whether they would be for Saint-Denis, or perhaps they may become like other previous ones, that the intention wasn't to gentrify, but that's been the outcome. I guess we're still to wait and see. And have there been Parisian white elephants? This is another thing to consider. We can't argue that those Rio 2016 or Athens 2004 facilities that fell into disuse were a waste of public money. But Paris 2016 only built 2 new purpose-built facilities. The Aquatic Centre, and this is called, that one there is in fact the Adidas Centre, which is for indoor sports. And most of it has been repurposing and renovating existing facilities. And this is part of the commitment to environmental sustainability. And this is perhaps the fact that they've only built these 2 new purpose-built facilities is why, in relative terms, the cost of Paris was less. They're not producing white elephants because both these facilities are going to be well kept, used regularly and be full to capacity. Unlike in many of these other places where white elephants did exist. So perhaps this is where the gentrification of Saint-Denis is perhaps up for grabs. We're still not sure, but certainly I don't think there's Parisian 2004 white elephants. But there has been social cleansing, and the creation of an Olympic city and securitization and the forced removal of people from Paris to create it as an Olympic city was certainly a big issue. And 400 migrant workers evicted to make way for the Olympic Village, 60 squats cleared from near Olympic sites, all as a way of trying to hide the poor from the world's gaze that the Olympics brings. And this is the way it has been described, that the forced eviction of migrant workers and unhoused people that were unhoused within the city was really sweeping what people who were considered undesirable in the Olympic city, sweeping them under the rug. And these people were reaccommodated, as it says in the video clip, to one of 10 regionally located temporary homeless shelters around the country. So they're forcibly relocated, reaccommodated to, it's like being kicked out of Washington DC and being moved to, Cincinnati and 10 centres around the country just to get these undesirables, sweeping them under the rug, getting them out, hiding the poor from the Olympic city that Paris wanted to be in 2024. And it's difficult to argue, this is a PBS video clip, that this is social cleansing and clearing homeless out of Paris. And the argument was, rather like in Rio, sort out the homeless issue rather than sweeping the homeless issue under the rug, which is quite an interesting way of thinking about it. And as Ruckert puts the Olympics in the Parisian sense, and perhaps even in Rio de Janeiro and some other games, have been an effective displacement machine, a way of displacing undesirable, quote-unquote, undesirable people within the city or from the city elsewhere. And in order to do this, Paris implemented a zero crime program, and there was massive securitization, as you'll see here, involving the use of military forces, police, and there they are, forcing these people to move and to reaccommodate out from these places. So there was definite, as a way of realising this displacement, you needed mass securitization, the mass influence of the security forces to make it happen. So is Paris 2024 following the trend? In some ways, this is basically saying perhaps it is. Increased security, creating spaces for wealthy residents in the international tourist class, and the development is highly uneven because it's benefiting private developers and construction interests. But I still maintain maybe there's a hope that Saint-Denis is a model for future Olympic developments that will create mixed income neighbourhoods and won't be just displacement and gentrification. But again, whether they're following the trend or it's something new, I think we need to really reconsider that or consider that going forward. Okay, in summary, what to make of all this? Well, in some senses, one could argue as a giga event, the Olympic Games and sporting mega events perhaps in general are in something of a crisis. And I think perhaps the Olympic Games more than the World Cup and other giga stroke mega events. And I think one reason is the curtain has pulled back and people have begun to realise that the Olympic Games is about celebratory spectacle. It's a euphoric moment, and it's more about economic benefit for the few rather than economic prosperity or even improvement in life for the many. It is a way of generating capital for a restricted number of people. Does it positively benefit in the long term the general population of host cities for World Cups or Olympics? That's a very questionable thing to ask, and people have begun to certainly question it considerably. And as Boykov says here, this Olympics is a form of celebration capitalism. It's about euphoria. It thrives on the positivity that these mega events bring to spectators and the general population. But increasingly, not everyone is euphoric. And this is a wall, Fuck the Olympics from London 2012. It's saying, it's not doing what we hoped it would do, or it isn't doing, or it's doing exactly what we thought it would do, not benefiting the general population. And so in recent times there's been a massive pushback against, in some areas, global sporting mega events, and many cities have withdrawn bids, largely because public objections to the possibility of hosting the games. The public have become aware that they're not necessarily a good thing, and they're questioning the use of public money in billions of dollars for hosting these massive mega event sports circuses. And as a result, local politicians said no on a huge number, we're not going to do that. We're going to pull back, and we're going to use our money elsewhere. Most recently, the Victoria Commonwealth Games, they agreed to host it. They got their bid and they pulled it because they said it wasn't economic viable and it was increasingly unpopular. But there are multiple examples of this, and so we've seen this pushback going back a number of years. Here's protest in 2013 about the upcoming Brazil World Cup in 2014 and Olympics in 2016. People saying we want hospitals with FIFA standards. When your son gets sick, take him to a stadium. Saying, essential public services aren't sufficient and we're wasting our money on the World Cup. We don't need the World Cup, we need money for hospitals and education. Again, red card for the World Cup that violates human rights by punishing people, forced evictions and militarised policing. And here in London 2012, Olympic legacy, homelessness and poverty. So they're saying that gentrification is going to be the outcome. And so immediately prior to the London Games, people were very critical of what they were actually going to do socially for the local population. And here we go, Olympic gentrification, activism, a process by which middle-class people take up residence in a traditional working-class area of a city, changing the character of an area. Regeneration is gentrification. People realising, it's come to the fore, that the hosting and the commercial development isn't necessarily benefiting the common good. And it's happened in the US. The Chicago bid for the 26 games was basically rescinded, or the process, the local politicians stopped it because of the public outcry of the waste of money that the games would bring. Despite many people thinking, it'd be fantastic for Chicago and Chicagoland, the No Game Chicago movement agitating for better housing, schools, buses and trains rather than the Olympic Games won, and effectively they withdrew any sense of the bid. So it's happening all over the world. And here we had 2015 in Boston, 2009 for the 2016 games in Chicago. Both successful, really anti-neoliberal, anti-Olympic and pro-public spending on local populations movements that worked, interestingly. And again, it's happened all over the world. Here was again in Boston. Good book came out of it, and here Hamburg for the 2024 Olympics. And these were the withdrawals from 2024 for similar reasons. Rome, Hamburg and Budapest, big European cities, decided no, it wasn't for them. So to some degree one could think, if not the World Cup, but certainly the Olympic Games, and the Summer Olympic Game particularly, could be in a little bit of trouble. This demonstrates the amount of bids to host it, 11 for Athens, down to 2 for Paris. And going forward, there's been a diminishing interest in hosting the Games, and as a result, the IOC have streamlined the bid award process. And so for stability of the Games, they awarded both the 2024 and 2028 Games in March 17 to Paris and LA, because they were the last two cities bidding for the 2024 Games. So they said, right, we'll give Paris 2024 and LA 2028 to create some stability, so we know going forward where the Games are going to be. So maybe in the meantime they can redress the balance, they can make the process and the economics of it more transparent, and we can follow the Paris 24 model if it proves to be successful going into the future. And in Brisbane in 2021 was awarded the 2032 Games, and Brisbane was unopposed because basically, again, to streamline the system, the IOC gave Brisbane exclusive negotiating rights 6 months earlier. It was basically saying, you're going to be the bid, so it put off any other potential bidders just to make it more efficient, to streamline it, and to really guarantee the future of the Games and the stability of the mega event going forward into 2032. So clearly the IOC have recognised there's issues, and cities are more reticent about spending all this public money, so they have to nurture better relationships with potential host cities in order to get them to do it, which I think is significant. And maybe Los Angeles 2028 is going to be a new dawn for the Olympics. And it's called the SoFi Stadium, not the Soft Stadium. Anyway, I'll change that. Is it a new dawn, 2028? Sounds quite interesting. You know, Los Angeles Olympics, what is it, for the third time, I believe? Yep, 32, 84, 28. So, but why is it going to be a new dawn? And the then mayor, when he announced the bid, the successful bid for the Games in 2017, he even admitted, Garcetti, I think it's a rational thing for most cities not to bid for the Olympics these days because it's an immense cost for most places. I mean, that's a big admission, but we have a different model. So maybe there's a different model that LA brings. Instead of trying to fit the city into the Olympics by building the Olympics or building transforming our city into an Olympic city, we ask the Olympics to fit into our city. So the city as is, let's mould the Olympic Games into the city rather than transforming a new city. It sounds very good. So LA has been touted as the first no new construction Olympics because it's, as it says, LA 2028's commitment to fiscal responsibility and sustainability, which kind of sounds like a good way. We've got the facilities, we just need to modify them for you to fit in. And it is a private-public partnership, 7 billion, so it's another way, much less public funding for the Games. The LA 28 Games is the independently operated, privately funded, non-profit organisation that's responsible for delivering the Games. It's not a government organisation or a city organisation, it's independently operated and privately funded. 7 billion is its budget from corporate partners licensing agreements, hospitality, ticketing, and International Olympic Committee. So it's a totally different model from private money. And if there are overruns, which you know there will be, they would be covered by public funds. The city of Los Angeles is responsible for the first 270 million, the state of California for the next 270 million of overruns, and after which I don't know who is going to pay for the overruns, but I presume they're hoping that the LA Games 27 will get more private money to pay for it. And there will be major infrastructure improvements, interestingly, which are related to the hosting of the Games, which will be paid by public funds, but they're not part of the organisation process. So to some degree, the infrastructure is being paid by public monies, the argument being those infrastructure, highway projects, improvements to LAX, mass transit, roads, etc., are going to benefit the general population in the long term as well, not just the Olympics. So it's a good use of 1.8 billion of public monies, but the majority of which is 7 billion of private generated capital, and using existing stadiums like the SoFi Stadium. It's a football stadium where they're going to build a swimming pool on it, quite remarkable, and host closing and opening ceremonies, quite remarkable again. And I'm presuming this is the Rose Bowl, I presume, where they'll, I don't know, maybe they'll have the track and field there. Don't know, but it'll be interesting to see. And a crucial thing that the now mayor of Los Angeles has said, replacing Garcetti, we have to make sure that the Olympics is positive economically, and that the city of LA does not take an economic hit. And this is what they're trying to do by having private money pay for it. But as you know, private money may pay for it, but private money will also generate the profits. So maybe it won't take an economic hit, but it may not have a huge, great economic impact on the city, depending on where that money goes. Does LA kind of challenge the drain effect? Does it use local businesses to put money back into the economy? It'll be interesting to see. But what's going to happen in terms of displacement? And it would be very interesting to see, given the fact that LA has the biggest homeless population, or population of unsheltered individuals in the US, an estimated 80,000 people living on the streets. And in 1984, as the quote says here, LA sterilised its streets for the Olympics. How will it treat the homeless in 2028? Will it do a Paris 2024? Forced evictions of the homeless, relocation of. It'll be interesting to see what actually happens, whether it's a displacement, will there be forms of gentrification, and will security forces be used to make sure that this happens. Again, interesting to see. And unsurprisingly, perhaps, of all these questions, there is a not inconsiderable No Olympics LA movement, and Boykos' book here about fighting against mega sports in LA, Tokyo and beyond, No Olympians, is an interesting culmination of a lot of this work. But to some degree, I think the No Olympics movement is still going, but it's challenging, or it's fighting against the billion-dollar industry that is centered around hosting the Olympics. So you wonder what hope it has, but maybe it will bring to light issues of gentrification and forced displacement and unequal development that perhaps might happen, and maybe they'll have an impact on making the games more equitable and more positively impactful on the general population of LA, rather than just, as it says here, where does it go? Economically benefiting the few with few positives for the many. We'll see, I guess. All right. Sorry about that. Giving you a headache. So, as Perriman says, just to finish off, why the Olympics aren't good, I think we've shown that in some ways they are a negative, and mega events more generally can be negative, but I would also argue that they can be positive. So I don't think the Olympics is in crisis, or mega events in crisis, but I do think we have to work out as global events how they can be structured, delivered and experienced, and the impacts can be more beneficial to broader populations as a whole. So they can be better and they can be good for us, as Perriman says here. Okay, that was a lot. Thank you for your attention, and here we go. See you next time.